There are roads in this world that you should not drive on unless you are ready for an exciting adventure. This is my story, which begins when I was only 20 years old. It was a cold and snowy night, and I was driving back to my small village from a city in the southern United States. My friend lent me his car for the trip, as my car was in the shop. As I drove down the dark highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The road seemed to stretch out endlessly before me, the only light coming from headlights and the occasional flash of a distant street lamp. I was about halfway home when I saw it, a sign that said curve warning sign. I laughed to myself, thinking that was just a warning of the winding road ahead of me. Little did I know that the real danger was yet to come. As I rounded the corner, I saw flashing lights ahead. My heart sank when I realized it was an accident. A pickup truck had collided with another car, trapping 3 people inside. Without another thought, I stopped and ran to help. The scene was chaotic, as the injured were screaming for help, and the driver of the other car could not see anywhere. We tried to open the truck doors, but they were locked. The injured passengers were trapped with their feet pinned under the twisted metal of the wreckage. I will never forget the sound of their screams when we tried to free them. It was a sound of pure agony, one that would haunt me for the rest of my days. After what seemed like an eternity, we were able to free them, but the damage had already been done. One of the passengers lost his leg in the accident, a sight that made my stomach churn. When the ambulance arrived and took them away, I couldn't help but feel afraid. There was still a long way to go, and I knew this night would stay with me forever. So, if you ever find yourself on a road marked curve warning, pay attention. You never know what horrors await you in the dark. Have you ever experienced something that shattered your dreams and even extinguished them completely? This is the story of how I met my demise. One night, I decided to break free from the misery and pain that had consumed me. I got into my car and drove off into the cold winter night. Snow was falling heavily, and the road was barely visible. The only sound was the eerie howling of the wind as it whipped through the trees. As I drove, my mind wandered to the events of the past few months. I had been battling depression and anxiety, feeling trapped in a never-ending cycle of despair. I needed a break, a moment of freedom from the darkness that threatened to engulf me. Little did I know that my search for solace would lead me into a night of terror, unlike any other. The highway stretched out before me, a long winding ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate landscape. A sense of unease crept over me as I realized just how isolated I was. There were no other cars on the road, no signs of life anywhere. It was just me and the darkness, alone in the night. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden by the hood of his jacket. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. Fear gripped me as I stared at the man in front of me. What was he doing out here, in the middle of nowhere, on a night like this? I rolled down my window and called out to him, asking if he needed help. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring at me with cold, unseeing eyes. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that something was very wrong. Without warning, the man lunged at my car, his hands reaching for me. I screamed and hit the gas, swerving around him and speeding away into the night. I thought I had escaped, that I was safe, but then I heard it, the sound of another car approaching from behind. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the man in the hooded jacket behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on me with a look of pure hatred. He rammed into the back of my car, sending me spinning out of control. I fought to regain control of my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the man laughing behind me, his voice a chilling echo in the darkness. I knew then that I was in grave danger, that this man would stop at nothing to harm me. Desperate, I looked for a way out, a way to escape this nightmare. And then, I saw it. A faint light in the distance. It was a rest stop, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With renewed determination, I pushed my car to its limits, racing towards the light. As I pulled into the rest stop, I saw a group of people standing outside, their faces twisted in fear and confusion. I stumbled out of my car, tears streaming down my face, and ran to them for help. They took me in, wrapped me in a blanket, and listened as I told them what had happened. The police were called, and they searched the area for the man in the hooded jacket. But he was never found, and to this day, I still live in fear of the night, haunted by the memory of that terrifying encounter on the highway. Enjoying the content? Subscribe now for more. On a Wednesday night in October, I was driving back from a friend's house in the city, a journey that would take me about an hour in decent weather. However, an unexpected snowstorm had swept in, blanketing the long, lonely highway after midnight in a thick layer of snow. This particular stretch of road was often abandoned, save for the occasional semi-truck, their plates showing unfamiliar lettering and colors from places I'd never been to. It was 1:30 a.m., and it had been a long day of wandering around with my friends, exploring new cafes and shops. I was exhausted, my eyelids heavy. The swirling snow made the highway an eerie, otherworldly landscape of white. I drove cautiously, at times slowing my speed to a steady crawl, and flashing my hazard lights to alert anyone behind me. Suddenly, a vehicle appeared, its wheels half on the highway and half on the shoulder. I slammed on my brakes and pulled over behind it, narrowly avoiding hitting the bumper. My heart was racing after the near miss, so I put my car into park to catch my breath. I watched as the car slowly rolled forward off the road, fully parking on the shoulder. The car sat for a moment, then the driver's side window rolled down, and an arm appeared, waving for me to pull over. The adrenaline from the sudden stop was still pumping through my body, and it made sense to move further off the road. I followed the car as it took a slight turn onto a side road. It came to a stop, and the driver's side door opened. The driver, a tall, lean guy in his mid-30s, wearing a black winter jacket and jeans, walked towards me through the snow, smiling as he approached my car, illuminated by my headlights. I rolled down my window a crack, thinking maybe he was coming to apologize for his unsafe parking. He motioned for me to roll it down further, but I shook my head, feeling uneasy, and told him I would be able to hear him. He asked where I was heading, and I said home. He said the snowstorm wasn't supposed to let up anytime soon, and that it wasn't safe to drive in. I let him know I was okay with it. He raised his eyebrows and asked why I had pulled over then. I didn't want to start anything with this man, so I lied and said I had gotten a phone call and needed to pull over to answer it. He smirked, and it felt like he could tell I was lying. He said he lived with his wife and son just down the road, about 5 minutes away if I wanted to wait it out. I shook my head again, but he wasn't taking no for an answer. He tried to scare me, saying how it's 10 times more likely for me to die in a car crash when it's snowing heavily, and that I looked tired and should really think of my family before getting back on the road. I held my ground, but he was getting angry. He began looking back at his car, and I saw someone move in the passenger seat whom I hadn't seen before. Suddenly, the man was grabbing at my door handle, trying to open it. Thankfully, it was locked. The passenger door to the car opened, and another man came running towards me with a baseball bat. I put my car in reverse, and the driver yelled something at him as I hit the gas. He took a swing at my car but missed. Luckily, I hadn't pulled too far off the highway, but it was hard to tell where the road ended and the highway began as I backed up in the heavy snow. I turned my wheels and put my car into drive, praying there was no traffic coming up behind me. I floored it as I haphazardly merged onto the highway, not looking back. I often wonder when I'm driving that stretch of road if they tried to stop anyone else that night and what would have happened to me had I rolled my window down further. One night, my daughter and I were driving home on the highway after a long day at the hospital visiting my wife. It was winter, and the sound of raindrops on the car roof was soothing. My daughter, exhausted from the day, started to doze off in the passenger seat. Suddenly, there was a deafening explosion, and the car shook violently. I struggled to keep control as we veered off the road and crashed into a large tree. Thankfully, my daughter was unharmed, but the front wheels had exploded, leaving us stranded in the cold darkness of the night. I got out to assess the damage, and it was clear that we needed help. With only one spare tire, I decided to walk to a nearby village for assistance, leaving my daughter alone in the car. She was scared, but I reassured her that I would be back soon. As I walked, the rain intensified and the wind howled through the trees. I felt a sense of unease, as if someone was watching me from the shadows. Ignoring my instincts, I pressed on, determined to find help for my daughter. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the village. I explained our situation to the locals, and they agreed to help. As we made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. When we arrived, my worst fears were realized. A man had approached the car, trying to get inside. My daughter, terrified, had screamed, scaring him off. She was safe, but the thought of what could have happened haunted me. I called the police, and they arrived quickly. They searched the area, but found no sign of the man. I blamed myself for leaving my daughter alone, but she reassured me that everything was okay. To this day, I can't forget the horror of that night. It's a reminder that danger can strike when least expected, and the importance of being vigilant, especially on dark and stormy nights on the highway. The events of this story revolve around a young man named William. William was on his way to his grandfather's village, which is located in one of the remote rural areas. Due to his work, William was forced to travel at night. He knew that there was a shortcut that would make him reach his grandfather's house quickly, so he decided to travel along this road. However, William did not know what awaited him. The road was very dark, unpaved, and there were no other cars on it. Suddenly, while William was driving, a girl appeared in front of him, her hand covering her face. The girl seemed extremely terrified and started hitting on the window of William's car, saying, "Please open the door and take me with you. Please save me." William asked, "What is going on with you, ma'am?" The girl replied, "There is no time to explain. They will come for us at any time. Let us escape from here before it is too late." William's heart raced as he looked at the terrified girl. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should he let her in? What if this was a trap? But her fear seemed genuine, and he couldn't leave her alone in the dark. With a shaky hand, he unlocked the door and let her in. The girl, whose name was Emily, quickly got into the car and told William to drive away as fast as he could. She was shaking uncontrollably, and William could see the fear in her eyes. He asked her what had happened, but she was too scared to speak. They drove in silence for a while, with only the sound of the engine and Emily's quiet sobs filling the car. As they drove, Emily finally calmed down enough to tell William what had happened. She had been driving home from a friend's house when her car broke down on this deserted road. She had barely gotten out of the car when 4 men appeared out of nowhere and started chasing her. She had run as fast as she could, but they were closing in on her when William had appeared. William managed to escape in the car and returned. William decided to ask the girl, "What happened to you and how did you get here?" The girl answered, putting her hand on her face out of extreme fear, "My car broke down here, and these 4 men attacked me. I was so nervous, so I decided to leave the car and run away." William reassured her, saying, "Do not worry, I will take you home and you will be safe." He also mentioned the shortcuts that would help her reach home quickly. The rest of the drive was tense, with William constantly checking the rearview mirror for any sign of the men. They eventually reached Emily's house safely, and she thanked William profusely before disappearing into her house. William never found out who those men were or what they wanted, but he was grateful that he had been able to help Emily that night. It was a snowy and dark night. I was driving on a country highway, trying to return home after a long business trip. I was tired and restless after a hard day. All I wished for was to be with my wife and young son, who were waiting for me at home. Suddenly, my car stopped for no apparent reason. I heard an annoying sound from the engine. I tried to restart the engine, but it failed. I looked at the fuel gauge and saw that it was empty. I didn't understand how it happened, because I had filled the gas tank before I left town. I felt anxious and afraid. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees, fields, and hills. There was no sign of any car or building. I looked at my phone, but found no signal. It was my only means to communicate with the outside world. I tried searching for a network, but found nothing. I felt hopeless and isolated. I started walking along the side of the road, holding my flashlight. I was hoping to find a sign or a landmark that would point me in the right direction. But all I saw were endless trees, fields, and hills. The snowstorm was getting worse, and I could feel my clothes and hair getting wet. I quickly went back to my car and slept in it until the early morning. When I woke up, the snowstorm had subsided. I saw a truck approaching in the distance. I waved frantically, and the truck driver stopped to help me. He told me that I was lucky to be alive, as the area was known for its dangerous wildlife. I thanked him profusely and continued my journey home, grateful to be alive.